You ever have a day where the universe decides you're the main character whether you want it or not? That was me the morning Margaret Blackstone kicked in the door to my cabin. Well, kicked is dramatic. She flung it open hard enough that the old brass bell I'd hung for a touch of nostalgia went flying and landed somewhere behind the couch, probably scaring my poor dog for the 10th time that week. Margaret marched in like she owned the place, her finger already pointed straight at me, like I'd just gotten picked out of a lineup. And before I could even say good morning, she was already at a decibel only dogs and angry HOA presidents can reach, hollering about some Regulation 7.3 subsection B, brandishing a clipboard that looked like it had seen more wars than my great-uncle's canteen. My golden retriever, Bear, took one look at her and retreated behind the couch, whimpering like he knew what was coming. Now here's the kicker. Margaret had just stormed into a private meeting. Sitting around my old pine table were retired federal judge Harold Watkins, 2 property law attorneys from the city, and a notary who'd driven 2 hours to witness us sign a stack of documents. The 4 of them turned to stare at Margaret like she'd just wandered onto the wrong set. Judge Watkins, who could freeze a whole room just by removing his reading glasses, gave her that look, the kind that says, "Ma'am, I have put away more dangerous people before breakfast." He said, "Calm as you please. Unless you're here with a warrant or you're about to confess to criminal trespass, I suggest you leave this property, now." You should have seen Margaret's face. She opened and closed her mouth, fish out of water style, color turning somewhere between beet and plum as she tried to sputter something about firewood and paint violations. Then she spun on her heels and stormed out, but not before promising this wasn't over. She always had to get the last word, even if it meant yelling it through the door. When the door slammed, Michael, the younger lawyer, laughed and asked if that was the famous HOA president I'd warned them about. I couldn't help but grin, because after months of her antics, she'd finally barged in at exactly the wrong moment. She had no idea she'd just handed me everything I needed. Let me back up a sec. Name's David Sinclair. I'm 42, software engineer by trade, and about 12 years back, I bought this cabin in Pine Ridge Valley. It's 5 acres of trees, a pond, a whole lot of peace. And, until 2 years ago, 0 HOA nonsense. That was the whole draw. I could write code during the week, throw barbecue parties on the weekends, listen to the coyotes howl at night, and nobody bothered me. My closest neighbors were a quarter-mile away, but we helped each other when needed, cutting firewood, lending a truck, swapping garden tomatoes. It was, if you'll let me sound old for a second, the good life. That all changed when Silverwood Heights HOA decided they weren't big enough yet and gobbled up Pine Ridge Valley. They voted themselves in, led by, you guessed it, Margaret, a retired corporate compliance officer who clearly missed bossing people around. She showed up on my porch one Saturday, measuring tape in one hand and a little digital camera in the other, and announced my mailbox was 3 inches too tall. I told her that mailbox had been there a decade, and I'd built it myself. But she said if it wasn't fixed in 72 hours, I'd be fined. That was just the start of the crazy. For 18 months, Margaret found a new problem every week. The solar panels on my roof, aesthetically displeasing. The beehives out by the pond, liability hazard. My greenhouse, which had all the right permits from the county, non-approved structure. I'd come home and find notes taped to my trees, logs of violations, details about routine inspections she'd performed, even though I never gave her permission to step foot on my property. There was no common area, no shared amenities, just her, trespassing, playing sheriff. After finding footprints in my greenhouse and some tools moved around, I put up security cameras. And what I saw? Margaret, at least 3 times a week, sneaking around my place. She'd photograph my firewood, peek through my shed windows, even tried the doorknob to my cabin once, like she expected to catch me running a moonshine operation or something. But the creepiest part? She started showing strangers around, telling them the HOA was about to seize my land and soon it'd be a tennis court or a community center. She even promised a couple that my house would be gone by Christmas. Yeah, that happened. So I started keeping records, dates, photos, every violation notice, every time she lied to my neighbors. Apparently, I was now running an illegal honey operation, a fire hazard, maybe even an off-grid cult. She was relentless, and the neighborhood grapevine? It was working overtime. But the real hammer dropped when she sent me a letter, official HOA notice, $500 a day in fines, backdated 18 months. The grand total? Over $200,000. Pay up in 30 days, or they'd file a lien and start foreclosure. That's when I called Harold. We'd gone to college together, and after a long career as a federal judge, he was looking for an interesting project. I sent him my evidence. He called back. Give me a day. I'll bring backup. So 3 days later, my living room looked like a legal war room. Harold, two tough property law guys, mountains of files, coffee mugs everywhere. And you know what? They found something wild. Not only was Margaret breaking state and federal laws with her trespassing and harassment, but the entire HOA expansion never legally filed. The board minutes she waved around as proof, completely fake. She'd been running the show on forged documents for 2 years. Yeah, let that sink in. We were deep into drafting a cease and desist when Margaret made her big entrance. Judge Watkins told me later he hadn't seen entitlement that bold in 40 years. After she left, Michael pulled up the criminal code and started a list. Criminal trespass, breaking and entering, harassment, intimidation, fraud. It just kept going. By that afternoon, we'd filed for a restraining order. And here's where things really went off the rails. The judge, after reviewing our evidence, granted it immediately and referred the whole mess to the district attorney. Margaret got served in front of the entire HOA board. She screamed, threatened to call the governor, insisted, "I am the law in this neighborhood." Somebody filmed the meltdown, threw it on social media, and within a week, it had gone viral. Local news, then regional, then even a couple national outlets got wind of the HOA president who went too far. Turns out, this wasn't Margaret's first rodeo. She'd been booted from 2 other HOA boards for nearly identical stunts. Now the other board members scrambled to distance themselves. We had no idea she acted alone. More neighbors came forward. One elderly couple revealed Margaret had demanded they rip out their wheelchair ramp because the color didn't match the approved palette. Another family had videos of her measuring their lawn with a ruler at 6 in the morning. When the district attorney started digging, it got uglier. Margaret had pocketed fines into a personal emergency fund, forged signatures, invented fake regulations, even ran a bogus HOA website where she'd post made-up rules. The day of her trial was pure theater. Margaret rolled in wearing a power suit, tried to represent herself, and insisted the court had no jurisdiction over an HOA president acting under sovereign immunity. Judge Watkins was there to watch. He said later it was better than any reality TV. At one point, the court reporter started laughing so hard at Margaret's arguments that the judge had to call a recess. The verdict? Guilty. 12 counts of trespass, 6 counts of fraud, 3 counts of forgery, 1 felony for harassment. She got 3 years, 2 suspended if she behaved, 2,000 hours of community service, specifically helping elderly residents fix their homes, and ordered to pay back $375,000 to the folks she'd ripped off. When the judge read the sentence, Margaret actually asked if he was kidding. When she realized he wasn't, she fainted, flat out, and had to be carried out while the whole courtroom applauded. Now, the cabin is quieter. My mailbox is still standing, the beehives are humming, and I swear, honey's never tasted sweeter. But I can't help wondering, how many other neighborhoods out there are fighting their own Margaret? What would you have done in my shoes? Is it ever okay for a community to let one person grab power just because nobody wants to make a fuss? Or is justice something you gotta fight for every time, no matter how small the battle seems? Let me know down in the comments. Was I right to fight back? Ever run into an HOA nightmare of your own? Drop your story below. And hey, if you think justice was served, hit that like button, share this story, and let's hear what community really means to you.